We're talking Malik Willis today off the top. And if you watched last week's pod or listened to it, you know that Chris Trapasso is a huge Malik Willis guy. And I'm going to poke a little fun at you to start, then I'll let you take the floor, Traps. Malik Willis, ranked higher or lower than Mason Rudolph?
Probably grade-wise similarly, but I will say in my defense, I feel like I'm like the Braveheart gif where the guy pulls out his sword where everyone's running at him. That's kind of how it was for me with Mason Rudolph in 2018. I feel like that's how it's going to be with Malik Willis. What I will say is,
hold on, Chris, before you get going, this has been a wound reopened for me because now Mason Rudolph has to be the starter for my craptastic Steelers team as Josh Edwards smiles on knowingly. So
yeah, hopefully... I was just seeing that Mason Rudolph was trending on Twitter, and I was wondering why. And there's were they doing exit interviews today? And he was talking about, this is my chance to become the next starter in this storied franchise's history. And I immediately thought of myself and being wrong on that evaluation. And then you guys and Ryan, to potentially have Mason Rudolph as the week 1 starter. It probably doesn't feel the best after 15 years of Big Ben.
I saw him trending, Chris, and I hope he had been traded to the Browns, but alas, no such luck. All right, go ahead with Malik Willis.
I was saying that I learned from Mason Rudolph, and that I liked Mason Rudolph because he was a pocket-only passer, tried to get through his reads. I kind of scoffed at the idea that, hey, he doesn't have a big arm, but look, Tom Brady doesn't have a big arm, Drew Brees doesn't have a big arm, late career Peyton Manning was not throwing 50-yard bombs all over the field. As long as you're processing quickly, can get through your reads, you can be a good quarterback. And, of course, right after Mason Rudolph is drafted, Patrick Mahomes starts for the Chiefs, throws 50 touchdowns, throwing it all over the lot. Then there's Josh Allen, there's Deshaun Watson. Now we have Justin Herbert, and to a lesser extent, in terms of physical skill set, Joe Burrow really dominating the NFL at the quarterback spot. And I realized you kind of need to have a strong arm, especially in today's NFL. The improvisation
Mac Jones
ability
is the exception. Go ahead.
Mac Jones might be the exception. That you need to have that arm. And I think anyone watching the NFL, you don't need me, a draft analyst, to tell you that that's the way that the quarterback position is trending. And the one thing I will say, and this could maybe lead to a bigger conversation on what you guys think, I don't think Malik Willis is that inaccurate. I think his game against Ole Miss, he threw some interceptions, but in those games where Liberty was facing, competition that was around its level in terms of offensive and defensive line, secondaries with receivers, he was throwing a lot of accurate passes in stride down the field at the intermediate level. I think he got hit with the raw inaccurate label a little bit too early because of that Ole Miss game where he threw a bunch of interceptions. But I think if he gets a decent group around him like he had at Liberty when they were playing in conference, he can be that next quarterback with the big arm and the improvisation ability that you want to pick in the first round.
So, Traps, before I ask Josh this, give me your top – we'll do 6 quarterbacks. That seems to be the consensus. Who are your top 6?
My top 6, let me get my thing right here. I have Malik Willis at 1, Kenny Pickett at 2, Desmond Ridder at 3, Matt Corral 4, Sam Howell 5, and Bailey Zappi 6.
Okay. All right, Josh, let's start with your top 6, and then you can tell us how you feel about Malik Willis, where he fits in this pecking order of quarterbacks.
Yeah, so for me, it starts with Matt Corral, and then it goes to Kenny Pickett. You've got, obviously, Malik Willis up there for me as well. I'm probably in the middle of you two in terms of where I have Willis slated. And then I have, well, let's see. Next, it would have been Jay Kaner had he came into this draft class. But then you're talking about the group with Sam Howell, Carson Strong, and Desmond Ridder, who I've been a little bit lower on than some others in this class. But
Traps didn't have Carson Strong in his top 6.
I did not. So
and
we're not seeing an eye on this, Ryan.
Yeah, I can understand that as well. The concern I have with Malik Willis, and this was kind of a talking point on Twitter recently, is that his sack rate on dropbacks, I think, was 13.1% or something absurd like that. Now, if you're looking at the perceived top 7 quarterbacks this year, Sam Howell's the next closest at 12.1%. The other 5 quarterbacks are at 6.6% or less. As I reflect on last season, these numbers were a little bit different than what I had seen mentioned elsewhere, but in a relative ballpark, Justin Fields was 9.4%, which was a relatively big outlier considering or compared to the rest of the class, because everybody else was at 4.5% or lower.
And Justin Herbert did not play great his senior season at Oregon.
Yeah. So, when you're talking about that level of discrepancy between 13.1% and Trevor Lawrence at 4.5% last year, that's a huge difference. I mean, you're talking about a quarterback that is holding on to the ball a little bit too long, and maybe that's because he feels like he doesn't have the talent to compete against some of the teams that he's had on the schedule this year. But you also have to wonder if his processing is lagging behind a little bit as well, which has to be a concern as he moves to the next level.
So a couple things, and I'm glad that we have different lists here because I think that's important, so we're not all group thinking. Our guy Pete Prisco always talks about the Twitter cult, and he's exactly right. Like, if you stare at something too long, no matter if it's NFL draft or whatever, you start to believe it. So that's good. And, we'll get pushback, and as we all know, and as Streps knows, especially with the Mason Rudolph stuff, people can actually hate you over who you like and don't like. So whatever. I don't care.
They never praise you, though. They never praise you. It's always the ones you get wrong.
That's why I always keep tweeting out that me talking about Mac Jones thing from last February. Until he gets cut or something, you'll be seeing that a lot on my timeline. But hey, like Dave Chappelle says, Twitter ain't real, so it doesn't matter. So here's my thing with, I'll give you my list first. So Matt Corral first, Kenny Pickett, and then Willis. Carson Strong's 4, and I don't know if Traps, if your issue with Carson Strong is the knee related or just something else. But the knees,
mobility,
yeah, and he does not have it. I mean, I was watching some games the other day just to refresh my memory, and he looked like slow man's Mac Jones back there, and that's not a compliment. 5, I have Sam Howell, then I have Desmond Ridder 6. And for me, like, honestly, and I've said this before, Matt Corral is the only first-round grade that I have. But the thing about Malik Willis is, and we talk about it all the time on this show, and if you've seen him play, it sort of jumps out at you, is that when you sort of build a quarterback in the lab, other than his height, and I think he's 6'1", 6'2", we'll see how tall he really is when he gets to the Senior Bowl, he's exactly what you want. He's built sturdy. He's built like Russ Wilson. He has a great arm like Russ Wilson. He runs better than Russ did, although Russ ran more than he does now for sure. But I think I'm with Josh on what's he seeing and not seeing? That you mentioned the Ole Miss game where he did not play well. I was watching the Louisiana Lafayette game. I'm halfway through that. And the very first play of the game, there's two guys running wide open on the right side in the middle of the field. And he goes off those reads, and those appear to be his first reads, and goes left and then has to scramble. And I remember talking to Scott about this. He said the issue with Malik is that man coverage, he'll eat you up. But if you give him any sort of zone looks, that's when he takes that half second to sort of process what's going on, and he may miss these open guys. That can be fixed. I mean, that's not the end of the world, but we have to go on what we see. And right now, he's not a first-round guy for me, but that doesn't mean he will not go in the first round. In fact, I think I've had him going in my mock drafts in the first round for the last month or so, maybe even longer. And I know certainly Traps has because he likes him the best. And look, there is no Cinderella in this draft class. It's all a bunch of you're trying to figure out, what can I live with, what can we work with, and so on and so forth. So I'm not a huge Malik Willis guy. I hope he has fantastic success, but based on what I've seen, it hasn't popped. I will say this, however, I went back and checked over the summer. I watched him. I had like a mid to late day 3 grade on him. So he's gotten a lot better. And that's also the conversation that you have to keep in mind, because I think when people get mad at you on social media or whatever, fans specifically, is that they're taking a snapshot of the player that they saw throw 5 touchdowns in one game, and they get angry at you about all the other stuff, the projections and all that. So how high, Traps, do you think Malik can go?
I think he could go somewhere in the top 10. I think there's enough teams that need a quarterback, although this season might be stranger than ever with, potentially Aaron Rodgers being on the market, Russell Wilson. That could change a lot of things. Deshaun Watson, that maybe we get to even early April and like none of those teams need a quarterback that early. I just think he has top 10 tools. And if you are talking about Kenny Pickett, who I like, Matt Corral, not as much, but I could see him going in the first round. I just don't think they have first round caliber traits. And that in watching the first and second year quarterbacks, I did a grading series every week at cbssports.com on Tuesdays. And I noticed with guys like Tua Tagovailoa, with Jalen Hurts, and to a certain degree, Mac Jones, like offensive coordinators in today's NFL they can scheme production. You can throw tunnel screens, bubble screens. The RPO game has really infiltrated the NFL. Jalen Hurts had a bunch of games this season for Philadelphia, and I think he took a step forward where the Eagles offense didn't really ask him to do that much. He was getting the ball out in a hurry, drag routes to open receivers, easy throws into the flat. It was the quarterbacks like Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow in that study that were certainly getting those easy throws, the play action bootlegs out wide, throw into the flat to the tight end. But they were really moving the needle and making those big throws to either win games for their teams or keep them in games where their defense wasn't holding up their end of the bargain by making those ridiculous throws 15 plus yards down the field on the run where they're eluding a defender. I think Kenny Pickett flashed that a little bit. Matt Corral made plays here and there doing that, but I think every game from Malik Willis, I saw at least 3 or 4 of those big-time throws. Yes, it was against lesser competition. The corners weren't nearly as fast as what they're going to be in the NFL, but I kind of liken it to, and maybe it's just comes from watching Josh Allen. Josh Allen, draft stock, and I was not a fan of Josh Allen, took a big hit. They played Iowa and Oregon, Wyoming did, in that 2017 season. Josh Allen got sacked a bunch. He threw a pick 6. He just looked completely overwhelmed, trying to do too much. Those are the same vibes that I got from Malik Willis against Ole Miss. When you watch him against Middle Tennessee State, Troy, whatever it may be, even Syracuse, he looked like he belonged. So I think if I'm searching for a quarterback in round 1, I'm not at this point hoping for like high-ish floor but low ceiling. I want to be able to compete with the Justin Herberts and the Josh Allens and the Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, I was at that Syracuse game, and I thought he held his own. He wasn't the reason they lost that football game for sure. They have one guy on that team, and his name's Malik Willis. Josh, let me ask you this. I've typically had Malik going anywhere from like the 11 to 20-ish range, and that's just me speculating. But let me ask you, Traps mentioned Jalen Hurts. If Jalen Hurts were coming out in this draft class, where would he rank? Would he rank ahead of Malik Willis for you, below, around that range?
He would probably rank below just because I think Willis has a higher ceiling. I think Philadelphia did a lot to take, the game out of his hands in a little bit this season. I think if you asked Devontae Smith about that passing offense, he would probably have some frustrations that he would voice privately because there were some throws left on the field that Hurts simply did not make. And as Trapp said, he progressed over the course of the season, but he's not to the point where you feel comfortable stating with certainty that this is your franchise quarterback moving forward. So as we look at this quarterback class, I don't have a first-round grade on any of them right now. Some of them are going to go in the first round. That's just the nature of the beast. Quarterback needs, drive players up the board, and they're ultimately going to be taken in the first round. But I think Hurts belongs in that same bucket of players in terms of, they could have something here, but they're not somebody that I feel confident in saying is going to be a Joe Burrow or, to a lesser extent, Justin Herbert. We all had our concerns when he was coming out of the draft, but you obviously saw the amount of talent and potential that he had at the position.
All right, Josh, I'll stay with you for this one, and I'll go to Traps. What's the best case scenario landing spot for Malik Willis? I joked, only half jokingly, that it was the Browns in terms of the infrastructure they have there. I think Baker's coming back, and I think Baker's obviously better than Malik Willis as we sit here. But is there an organization like that where, as opposed to throwing him on the Lions, for example, actually the Texans is probably a better example of a worse team. What's the best case scenario for a guy who needs a year, maybe even a little more than a year, to grow into that role?
Yeah, I don't think the Browns are a good fit for Willis, but I think Willis is a good fit for the Browns because with that running game,
right,
they would be able to bring him along slowly and be able to use his feet a little bit more naturally. Now, I think, in terms of the realistic options, you're probably looking at New Orleans and Sean Payton as a guy that just simply understands the quarterback position and how to get the most out of it. So as I'm looking at, ideal fits for these individual players, New Orleans has to be up there for Malik Willis just because I have so much confidence in Sean Payton and what he's able to do at that position, because I think he is able to make things easier at the quarterback position for a quarterback to come along at his own pace and kind of develop some of the traits that are lagging behind as he comes into the NFL.
And almost as important is that they have an offensive line. Like, you can mock draft Malik Willis to Pittsburgh all day long. he's going to get murdered back there unless he can also block before he has to throw passes. Traps, what's a good landing spot? I think the Saints is number one on my list if we're excluding the Browns for both comical and obvious reasons.
I would love the Falcons for Malik Willis, even if we're thinking that Matt Ryan is going to be the quarterback next season, which based on his contract probably will be the case. It would kind of be, and I'm going back to the Josh Allen comparison, it would kind of be like when Josh Allen over the past couple of years, not in 2021, but had Matt Barkley as his backup. And he said that he learned so much about the game from Matt Barkley, even with him as the second stringer, and that Matt Barkley, showed Josh Allen how to throw with anticipation, how to read coverages. I think to learn from Matt Ryan for a season, just literally in the quarterback room and in practice of how, I mean, not saying that Matt Ryan has a Matt Barkley-esque skill set, but he's more of a precision passer that throws with anticipation, not going to run around a ton. I think that would work wonders for Malik Willis to say, hey, you're not going to be the starter. You have an entrenched guy that's been, this franchise's starting quarterback for over a decade now. He's in front of you. Learn from him. Take some of his nuances to rein in some of the over-aggression. And then in 2023, with Kyle Pitts entering his third season, hopefully a rebuild offensive line a little bit, maybe some more weapons at receiver if Calvin Ridley is gone. Then you let Malik Willis take over where he's kind of fine-tuned some of the rough edges of his game.
Yeah, I mentioned the Lions earlier as not a great landing spot, but I actually take that back. I was thinking the Texans, and I was looking at the top of the draft board. The Lions may not be terrible. Their offensive line isn't bad. Jared Goff's going to play another year. I feel like that organization is going in the right direction, and that might be one of the rare cases where you can add a franchise quarterback to a team that hasn't won a lot of football games recently, and it has a chance to work out down the road. It ain't going to work out next year, almost certainly, but that's something to consider. Like the Broncos on some level, but I don't know what's going on with the head coach there, and I think Drew Lock's time is done, but obviously if they're in the running for Aaron Rodgers, that would be a different conversation. So, all right, Malik Willis. That's our little scouting report on him. I'm sure we'll go through these other quarterbacks as we get through this process here. But